If you heard my Why I'm a Christian talk that I did in August last year, you may remember that I studied drama at university. So when I heard the title of this sermon series, The Drama of Mark's Gospel, my inner theatre geek perked up. Here, at last, is a topic I have a little background knowledge in, at least the drama part, if not so much the theology of Mark. Drama students learn that when actors study a text, they use a number of techniques to help them better understand the character they'll be playing. One of these techniques, sometimes called given circumstances, is to consider the external elements that influence a character's actions. They include the historical, cultural, and geographical setting, their relationship to other characters, and so on. Another is to think about motivation, which simply means understanding what a character wants, sometimes called an objective. Characters have a super objective, which is what they're working towards throughout a narrative, and sometimes shorter sub-objectives, which they must achieve in each scene in order to reach their super objective. But there's a catch, because watching someone get what they want too easily doesn't make a very compelling drama. So drama is created by placing obstacles in a character's path, which they must overcome in order to achieve their objective. Obstacles can be internal or external, physical, intellectual, or spiritual, anything that stands in the way of the character getting what they want in the story. So, when asked to explore the drama of Mark's Gospel, my immediate instinct was to turn to these dramatic techniques to see if they could help me uncover what this passage teaches us about the character of Jesus. I started with the given circumstances. Woven into the fabric of first century Jewish culture are the laws given to the fledgling nation of Israel through Moses and set out in the Torah. These ancient Jewish scriptures, which for us make up the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of our Bible, influence not only the religious practices, but the culture, traditions, and social customs of the world into which Jesus was born and practiced his ministry. These 5 books actually contain a mix of stories and laws. The stories start with God's perfect creation, shortly followed by Adam and Eve's disobedience, which brings death and sin into the world and leads to their banishment from the Garden of Eden, cutting them off from God's life-giving presence. The rest of the narrative shows how God sets plans in motion to fix this, as he works to forge a relationship, first with individuals, and then with the nation of Israel, so that he can live amongst his created people again, and they can be in his presence as they were in Eden. However, the people are still corrupted by sin and death, and this needs to be dealt with before they can enter the presence of a holy God. The books of Leviticus and Numbers contain laws that deal with this problem. There are laws that deal with moral impurity or sin, and rules that deal with ritual impurity, also translated as uncleanness. The rules about ritual purity address the fact that since the fall, humans are mortal beings who inhabit a world where everything is tainted by death. To be ritually clean is to separate yourself from anything associated with death. Uncleanness is associated with aspects of human existence which are seen as signs of sickness or decay. In other words, symptoms of mortality. So uncleanness can be caused by contact with mold or mildew, by skin disease, which is an outward sign of sickness, by contact with dead animals or people, and by bodily discharges. This last one includes reproductive fluids, semen, and uterine blood, because they are representative of life, and to be leaking life in the presence of God, the creator of life, is to symbolically bring death into his presence. So powerful is the state of uncleanness that it is contagious. Anyone coming into contact with something or somebody unclean then becomes unclean themselves. The laws gave rituals that the Israelites must follow if they become unclean. These rituals bring the individual who performs them back into a state of cleanness, in other words, healthy and whole, the opposite of sick and decaying, and therefore fit to come into God's holy, life-giving presence. Today's passage has 2 stories that feature uncleanness. There's the woman who's been subject to bleeding for 12 years. We're not given any details, but we assume that this is some form of uterine bleeding, leaving her in a perpetual state of uncleanness. And then there is the dead body of Jairus' daughter, which will contaminate anyone who comes into contact with it, making them also ritually unclean. So, this gives us the social, cultural, and religious context in which Jesus' miracles take place. Everyone witnessing these events understood what makes someone unclean and how that uncleanness can be passed on to others through contact. In Jesus' world, people were almost hyper-vigilant about contamination, and that's resulted in those people being seen as unclean being ostracized. Uncleanness doesn't only mean that someone cannot participate in worship. In the world of Mark's Gospel, the unclean could barely participate in society at all. This is why those with skin diseases, such as leprosy, lived in colonies outside of the towns. And so we have our given circumstances. Next, let's consider motivation. What objectives do these characters have, and what obstacles do they need to overcome in order to achieve them? The story starts with Jairus, one of the synagogue leaders, coming to Jesus to beg for healing for his daughter who is dying. Well, the good news for any budding actors studying Jairus, his objective is pretty clear. He wants to bring Jesus to his house so that his daughter will live. But there are obstacles. Jairus is a leader at the synagogue. He works closely with the Pharisees, and we know that they were not exactly big fans of Jesus. In terms of local and workplace politics, Jairus would have been wise to keep his distance from Jesus. If he didn't, he would risk putting himself in a difficult position with his colleagues, undermining his status in the community, and possibly even losing his job at the synagogue if things get really bad between Jesus and the Pharisees. It's a small town, and Jesus would probably have known who Jairus was, so perhaps Jairus was also fearful that Jesus would refuse his request based on his association with the Pharisees. We don't know if there was anything else that could have inspired Jairus to overcome these barriers to getting close to Jesus, but we can easily understand how the desperation of a father watching his daughter's life slipping away would motivate him to ignore these concerns about social status, job security, and potential rejection by Jesus, and lead to the moment where he goes public with his faith in Jesus' ability to heal, throwing himself at Jesus' feet and pleading earnestly with him to come to his house. Mark doesn't tell us what Jesus said in response to Jairus' request, only that Jesus goes with Jairus. What relief Jairus must have felt in that moment. Perhaps he will get what he wants after all. But immediately he's faced with more obstacles, this time external. First in the form of the great crowds pressing around Jesus, slowing down progress to his house, and then in the form of our second story, which interrupts the first and causes further delays. The second story is also about somebody in search of healing, this time for herself. Mark tells us she's been bleeding for 12 years. As we know, her condition makes her ritually unclean, so she would have been unable to engage in everyday life and would have been pushed to the margins of society. We don't know her situation before she developed this affliction, but Mark tells us she spent all her money trying to find a cure, gradually getting worse, not better. Whatever her social status had once been, by this point, she has become the lowest of the low, poor, suffering, and shut out of everyday life. This character's objective is clear. Mark even spells it out for us. She wants to touch Jesus so that she can be healed. Like Jairus, this woman has obstacles to overcome in order to achieve her objective. After years of being told not to touch anyone, she has to push through the crowds to reach Jesus. She believes so strongly in his power that she thinks if she can just touch his clothes, she will be healed. Even that action takes courage. How many times must powerful men have shouted at this woman for coming near them, afraid of being made unclean by their contact with her? But like Jairus, her need for healing and her faith in Jesus' ability to provide it is greater than her fears, and she pushes on toward her goal. Elbowing her way through the crowd until she is directly behind Jesus, she reaches out and touches his clothes. And it works. Immediately, the bleeding stops. Mark doesn't give us much time to dwell on how the woman must be feeling. After a brief conversation between her and Jesus, the action-packed narrative switches immediately back to Jairus' story, and it seems that he is never going to achieve his objective, because some men arrive to tell him that his daughter has died, and he should not bother Jesus anymore. However, Jesus ignores these men, and taking Peter, James, and John with him, goes to Jairus' house. And with Jairus, his wife, and the 3 disciples, he goes in to where the dead girl is lying. He takes her by the hand and says, "Little girl, get up." At his words, the little girl, whose death is being mourned outside, gets up and walks around. And here, slightly randomly, Mark tells us in brackets that the little girl was 12 years old. And then Jesus gives those in the room an order, which they must have found incredibly difficult to obey, not to tell anyone what they have witnessed. Mark doesn't spell out Jesus's objectives for us as clearly as he does with Jairus or the woman, so it's not immediately obvious why he tells them to stay quiet. When an actor's struggling to understand a character's motivation, they go back to script analysis and look at the words in a text to try and find out what it is they want. Actors know that writers don't add words to their drama accidentally, and if you heard Nathan's recent talks about biblical literature, you'll know that neither did the writers of the Bible. That random fact that the girl was 12 years old draws a parallel with a woman bleeding for 12 years. When biblical authors throw numbers at us, it's usually significant. What other examples are there of the number 12 being used in the Bible? Well, there are 12 tribes of Israel, and Jesus calls 12 disciples. 12 is associated with the establishment of perfect order and government, the completeness of God's authority on earth. In drawing this particular parallel, Mark is telling his readers something about Jesus' super objective here, and it's associated with the establishment of God's complete authority on earth. He is laying the foundations for his kingdom. But back to our script analysis. Let's look at Jesus' words. It won't take too long. He only speaks 5 lines of dialogue in Mark's telling of this story. Firstly, he asks, "Who touched my clothes?" Mark tells us that when the woman touches him and is healed, Jesus realizes that power has gone out from himself. This raises 2 questions about this Jesus character. Firstly, if he's so powerful, why does he need to ask who touched him? Didn't he already know? I'm not sure if we can be 100% certain of the answer to that question, but whether he knew or not, I don't believe he was seeking the answer for himself. Look at what happens next. This woman, who has spent years being forced to the margins of society, has to come forward. Her marginalisation is so embedded that she didn't have the courage to ask Jesus for healing as Jairus did. Rather, she tries to receive it as unobtrusively as possible. Even once she knows that she has been physically healed, when she is compelled to identify herself, we see that the fear is still there. She falls at Jesus' feet, trembling. No doubt she's wondering how this man, a rabbi and a leader, will respond to knowing that she, an unclean woman, has touched him. Jesus knows that this woman needs healing not only in her body, but in her mind and spirit as well. He wants not only to heal her physical ailments, he wants to make her healthy and whole. When he asks this question, it's because Jesus wants the woman to tell him the whole truth and to ensure that she hears the words that he has for her, words we will look at in a moment. The second question is, what is it about Jesus that means rather than being contaminated by this woman's uncleanness when she touches him, somehow things work in the opposite direction? She touches him and the power goes out from him and she is healed. Rather than her contaminating Jesus' state of purity, he removes her state of uncleanness and restores her to a complete state of health. Contact with Jesus has had the same effect as performing the purity rituals of the Torah. Jesus' next words are spoken to the woman in response to her story. Rather than rebuke her for touching him, he calls her daughter, and he tells her that her faith has healed her. Go in peace, he says, and be freed from your suffering. What do these words tell us about what Jesus wants? He calls the woman daughter. He wants her to know that she is included. She is part of the family. How would it have felt for someone who's lived on the outside for so long to hear that word of belonging, I wonder? And he wants her and others listening to his words to understand the importance of faith. It is Jesus' power that has healed her, but it is her trust in what Jesus can do for her that has enabled healing to take place, enabled her to be set free from her suffering. The next words Jesus speaks are to Jairus, and on a similar theme. When the men come to tell Jairus that his daughter has died and he should leave Jesus alone, Jesus says to him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." That's a big statement to say to someone who's just heard that his daughter has died. But Jesus wants those to come to him to understand the importance of faith in him. I wonder if the scene he's just witnessed helped Jairus' faith at that moment. Whether seeing the woman healed and hearing Jesus' words, "Your faith has healed you," somehow give Jairus hope in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. We don't know how much faith Jairus has at this point, but he believes enough to bring Jesus to his house. Here they encounter the mourners, and Jesus speaks for the fourth time in the passage. Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. This time we do know the response. The people laugh at Jesus. It was customary in those days to hire professional mourners when a death occurred. The speed at which these people turned from weeping and wailing to ridiculing Jesus suggests that that's probably who they were. And as professional mourners, they have seen enough of death to know the difference between a dead body and someone asleep. Jesus hasn't even gone into the room where the little girl is yet, so he isn't basing this comment on visible signs of life. So why does he say it? It seems that he wants those present to know that he has a different perspective on death from them. Death is not a permanent state in Jesus' mind. Jesus then goes into the little girl's room, where he takes her by the hand and speaks the final words attributed to him in this passage, Talitha Koum, which can be translated as, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." We know that Jesus' immediate objective here is to raise this child from the dead, an objective which, miraculously, he achieves. What's interesting are the words that he uses. Interesting enough that Mark, although writing in Greek, chooses to record them in the original Aramaic. In keeping with his comment that the child is simply sleeping, but in contrast with the miracle that he's performing, Jesus uses an ordinary, everyday phrase to bring her back from death, one which a parent might use to wake a sleeping child. "Get up, little one." Jesus is reinforcing his earlier message that his perspective on death is different from ours. It's as if, despite his human nature, he is not affected by mortality in the way that the rest of us are. This is reinforced by his touching of the dead girl's hand. Just as he was not contaminated by the uncleanness of the woman who touched him earlier, now the uncleanness of death does not contaminate him. The opposite happens. His power overcomes the power of death and brings the little girl back to life. This miracle, performed in private, is a foreshadowing of the greater public miracle that is coming, when Jesus will overcome death himself and rise from the tomb. But that time has not yet come. These two stories are only short scenes in the drama of Jesus' ministry. As we continue to read through Mark's Gospel, we see that Jesus has not yet achieved his super objective. He has more work to do to establish his authority and build his kingdom before he's ready to face his death. And that is why, for now, this miracle of Jairus' daughter needs to remain private, known only to those who have witnessed it. It's already becoming difficult for Jesus to get around as word of his healing power spreads. If people know he has the power to raise the dead, it will become even harder. More importantly, if those who already oppose Jesus hear that he has somehow turned the purity laws on their head, they will see him as an even bigger threat to the status quo and may well start calling for his execution too soon. So, we've explored the given circumstances and character motivations and analysed Jesus' lines or words in this drama. But there is one more dramatic element to consider. Drama is not simply about telling a good story. Good drama creates connection between the characters and the audience because it wants to impact the audience in some way. When Mark wrote his gospel, he wanted his readers to respond to the character of Jesus presented in the text. So what is our response to what we have read? And what words might Jesus have for us? The answer to that question might depend somewhat on our own given circumstances. What is the state of our relationship with Jesus? The two characters we met in these stories came from opposite ends of the social scale, but both of them needed to do the same thing in order to achieve the healing that they sought, to fall at Jesus' feet and declare their faith in him. Are we ready to throw ourselves at his feet and tell him what we need? Or, even if that is what we want to do, are there obstacles in our way? Perhaps, like Jairus, making a public declaration of our faith in Jesus could make our lives difficult at work or risk our social standing in the community. Or perhaps there are voices telling us that our problems are too big to be overcome and therefore not worth bothering Jesus about. If that is you, listen to the words of Jesus in this story. Don't be afraid, just believe. Maybe we feel closer to the woman's situation. Perhaps we are brave enough to draw close to Jesus, but fall short of telling him the whole truth about our lives. We may not live by the purity laws of the Torah, but there are still plenty of ways we can be pushed to the margins, told we are not good enough, and plenty of things about ourselves that can make us believe that we are unfit to come into God's presence. But today's passage reminds us that Jesus cannot be contaminated by our uncleanness. So if we come to God through faith in him, his touch will permanently remove uncleanness from us, restoring us to a fullness of life and making us fit to be in God's holy presence. We don't need the rituals given to the Israelites to deal with their uncleanness because we have Jesus, the fulfillment of those laws. And through him, we are restored to spiritual health and wholeness. Like the woman in the story, we can go in peace, free to live a life where God dwells with us and we are under his authority, helping to build the kingdom that Jesus established on earth. A place where the contamination of death has been removed from us so completely that one day, when we fall asleep, as Jairus' daughter did, we too will be awoken by the voice of Jesus calling to us, "Get up, little one." Amen.